Hello, Professor. So, today we're going to talk about dancing in Jaffa, and specifically we're looking at social unity through dance. We chose to talk about dance as a social unifier and dance as a socio-political tool. Lauren, Isabel, and I all contributed to this project, and I think you're gonna enjoy it. So, we're going to start with some background info. As you know, ballroom dancer Pierre Dulain returned to his hometown of Jaffa to unite the Palestinian and Israeli communities. So he decided to host essentially a competition that would last 10 weeks. And in his journey, he decided to take on 5 schools, 3 Jewish, 1 mixed, and 1 Palestinian only. He also invited his friend Yvonne Marceau, with who he's been dancing with for over 35 years, to help instruct the children on the finer points of ballroom dancing. So the reason why this is very interesting and important is because Israel is home to 2 major ethnic groups, the Israeli Jewish people and the Palestinian Arabs, and as we all know, over to the last 2 millennia they've been clashing in conflict. But most of the tensions that they have had over the last few years have stemmed from the establishment of Israel back in 1948 and the subsequent wars that followed. So, Dancing in Jaffa is a beautiful story told through the perspective of both Pierre and some of his students. In particular, Lois, a Jewish girl, who I believe is not pictured here. Noor at the top right, the girl dancing in the picture. Um, and also Allah, this Palestinian boy. Noor is also Palestinian. Um, there were a few other children who were mentioned, but those are the top three, or the three most important children. So our thesis was essentially that employing a strictly intergender and interethnic instruction guide, Dulain successfully used ballroom dancing to break down sociopolitical barriers and unite 2 historically opposed cultures. So, when we're talking about sociopolitical change, we are referring again to that divide that exists in Israel. Something we should know is that in their culture, um, or at least in their society, there is a very huge discrepancy between what is acceptable between communities. In fact, there were some moments in which Dulain could not access certain parts of the town that he was in simply because he was Palestinian. So, for example, he tried to take Yvonne back to his actual home um, place where he lived, and he couldn't because the man there was uncomfortable with Yvonne and essentially with him as a Palestinian. So, um, more specifically to the point, Delane forced children to reconcile with their enemy by actually making them dance together. So he invited at some point after a bit of instruction the Palestinian only school to a Jewish only school and paired off the children by their ethnicity. And initially, the children did not like that at all. In fact, they hated it. Some children refused to participate. Um, However, as the competition advanced and they continued to meet with each other, eventually they did start to warm up to it. At some point, in the competition, certain children were chosen to represent their school, and at that point, they were absolutely forced 100% to work with that other the ethnically diverse child as their pair. And at that point, you could see even more um, opening up of prejudices. So in specific, we have a few examples. We know that Lois and Allah, who were paired off together, actually became friends. Um, at one point in the movie, Allah invites Lois to show her how he lives and to go on their dad's boat. Lois, who's Jewish, makes friends with Noor, who is in her class. This is super important because throughout the entire movie, we see that Noor is completely isolated because she's Palestinian at a Jewish only school. Um, what's really interesting is that um, even the teachers were essentially isolating and picking at Noor simply because she was Palestinian. But eventually that started to change. But Lois and Noor hung out together at the park and ate watermelon, and that was the first time any girl from the class had spent time outside of school with Noor. And at the competition itself, there were no troubles. In fact, all the children and all of the parents were respecting each other at the least, and enjoying the whole scene. There were no complications. So, as a social unifier, we see that dance was able to bring these cultures and kind of take them out of their shelters. And the reason why I say that is because in these particular cultures that we're examining, intergender communication is frowned upon, and in fact, is almost not um, not a social thing. It's not common for people of different genders to communicate, and I think it's bizarre. But again, we have to understand this culture. So something in specific was that the mother of a child in the very beginning of the movie was essentially concerned about Pierre's program because she didn't want her child to dance with boys. She didn't want them to touch the boys. She wanted her child essentially to stay pure. This idea of purity. And Delane, when he brought in Miss Yvonne to the mixed school, the gatekeeper was refused to essentially touch her because he, like he said, he does not touch women, um, which is again just a good example of how rigid, how structured the culture is. Delane was able to make a little bit of headway, but more than anything, I think it was the dance. Just the fact that the children were actually experiencing something together. Um, at the beginning, the boys acted as if the girls had cooties, eventually learned to respect them and not call them names, so on and so forth. Again, by enforcing the gendered partnering, Delane normalized physical touch, which is huge. And dancing with Miss Yvonne concreted the idea that dance is not exclusive to a married couple, which is something in particular that a girl noted. She's like, "Oh, wait, you're not married? Oh, that's interesting." So again, breaking down these socio-political and social norms, essentially. So Delane's style is interesting. He is actually known for creating the Delane method, which is essentially characterized by respect and compassion through fundamental rigor. So he taught the children how to respect not only themselves but the others around them, and by doing so, he was able to incorporate um, more sociable behaviors. He was able to use dance um, to correct their etiquette, to correct their floor work, and eventually to correct their social interactions. So simple movements, again, really emphasizing the politeness of dance, at least of ballroom dance. He made it a point throughout the movie to make sure that the boys were saying, "May I please have this dance?" and for the lady to say, "Why, yes, of course, thank you." Um, and again, Pierre sums it up pretty well, but he said the process is logical. Each step is built on the previous one, so there's no randomness to it. So here we have a video, a clip of the children dancing, and I'll play it really quickly. So that's Noor, who's currently dancing. I love Noor. I really thought she was a wonderful little child. I was really sad for her though. But you see her practicing. That's also Lois. They're very dedicated to what they're doing. So the children actually enjoyed what they were doing. Um, so much so that they really put in the time and the effort to learn what they were doing. And that's something that reflects just how beautiful and um, how strong Delane's method was. So even though Pierre had struggles, he actually was able to succeed his goal. He used dance as a unifier. Again, just by enforcing that physical touch and normalizing the behavior, normalizing this respect. Um, and when it came down to competition again, everyone was great. Some final thoughts that we can say are essentially that if we respect each other and if we use dance as a means to communicate with each other, we'll be able to understand each other more. More than anything, I think Delane's method is what we need to keep in mind, that respect and compassion can go a long way, not only towards building a better etiquette, but by to understand each other culturally and to really dig deep at those destructive social norms. So something that we have here for you is a 25-minute post discussion of the film. I thought it was very interesting. I would love to hear what you have to say about it. But other than that, um, that is it. So thank you for listening.